Okay, there we are. Oh, hello, friends, and welcome to an important live stream here in the universe of Tim Kirby Russia. I guess I shouldn't be smiling. I'm smiling because I'm far from the usual studio. We are in the Caucasus Mountains as I speak to you, so please forgive the low pixel quality and low audio quality, but the show must go on, even when someone's technically on vacation. Because today we have had basically the predictions of a lot of the better sort of top tier pro-Russian or at least friendly, neutral, reasonable military analysts and political analysts and all those people. All of those sort of predictions have come true. The Russians have finally started a major offensive, a northern offensive going towards Kharkov. So that is why we are here today, and it's one of the reasons why I shouldn't have again started this live stream by smiling. But what can you do when your telephone keeps flopping about? Uh, you know, you can do nothing but laugh at your own frustrations. I really should have brought one of those nice stands to keep the telephone on. I didn't think about that. I should have bought one and brought it with me. I think there's one lying around in the kitchen somewhere. But anyways, guys, we're here, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Remember, at some point, I'll take calls and answer questions because I don't know if I have that much really to say today, besides the covering some key points about this major event. I don't mind taking off-topic questions. So basically, comment anywhere on Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore. It'll go to the chat, and I'll see those questions. Or if you want to call in, you use the raise your hand function, but we'll get to that later because for those who are watching this on YouTube recorded, those features are not so interesting. So anyways, what exactly happened today? You know, the today being the May 11th, so it would be the 10th anniversary of the formation of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Maybe there's a coincidence. Maybe there, because usually the Russians don't play these games of timings and making things match with the holidays. But starting the offensive probably after Victory Day was critical, whether it tied in with the founding of the republics. Who knows? But I think overall, like you've heard, especially Douglas McGregor mentioned over and over and over again, a lot depends on the mud. And as we've seen from the Russian forces that are moving, the ground looks very dry in Ukraine, very tan, a very soft beige, even lighter than my shirt here, probably closer to my skin color, to be honest, which means that the ground is pretty solid and is finally able to move. And so the Russian forces from the group that's now called North have gone in. So you know how we have the famous letter Z, but there's also O and V, the English letters Z, O, and V, all of which have a Russian equivalent. Now we have the northern group, which sort of has a symbol. It's like a rhombus, like a diamond, with an X going through the middle of the diamond. And so there's a lot of speculation as to what that means online. Some people think it is related to something like the symbol for the spear of Odin or something, which would be very strange because I'll put it this way, especially after the behavior of the private battalions in Ukraine. No one has any sympathy for paganism in Russia. Then again, maybe it just could be something, or I don't know. I always thought the whole Z and O and V were just chosen because they are symbols that are on every keyboard. If you look, a Russian keyboard has to have the Latin letters as well. Windows and Mac OS demand it. So I always thought that they just picked those letters because they're, O is the same in both, but that they each look different from each other, and they're all on the Latin keyboard, which you're stuck with anyways in Russia. So I thought that that was sort of the logic, but the northern group perhaps defies that logic because that is a symbol that you cannot find on your keyboard, no matter how hard you look. But anyways, what's been happening? If we can judge by certain better run Telegram channels than my own, like Intel Slava and DD Geopolitics and some of these other ones, UKR Leaks or whatever, they show maps that kind of almost point out that the Russians have gone in nearly halfway to Kharkov. So from within Russia proper, pushing towards Kharkov. Optimistic results show they've kind of gotten halfway. They've at least taken many little towns, or at least started to take them. So when we get into the whole world of, this sort of look into military, like what's actually happening on the front lines. Every day looks a little bit different. One side says one thing. Even within the Russian side, there's always a bunch of different stories. But nonetheless, Russia has sent formations from Russia proper in the north to create a completely new front. Okay. Now, one theory that's been thrown out as to why this is happening, and it's a theory that I do not think is true, is that the Russians want to create some sort of 10-kilometer buffer zone. If you remember, Putin threatened Kiev that because Kiev's forces were constantly attacking Belgorod and the areas around it and killing civilians and non-military targets, that one day he would have to then force a buffer zone to be created to protect the citizens of the Belgorodskaya region, right? And so there's this kind of rumor that I've heard certain people discuss, like the Duran, that there's this like going to be that the whole idea is to create this 10-kilometer buffer zone. I think that's some kind of like fantastical thinking. I don't think that's going to be the case. Although this has happened before, because if you remember, in Syria, when the Syrian war was still civil war, was still young, the Turks went in and established a 30-kilometer buffer zone, which essentially means they extended the Turkish border by 30 kilometers all the way across all of Syria, which is quite a substantial gain when you look at how long that border is. But I don't think Russia's going to do that, because the simple fact that this isn't the Napoleonic era, where you're lucky if a cannonball, can be aimed successfully like 500 yards or something. I think that was sort of the golden distance back then. I mean, I think the artillery that Russia uses, even the more like generic artillery shells, goes something ridiculous like 60 kilometers. So again, if you're going to establish just some sort of buffer zone with modern weaponry, and I was just talking about artillery. I'm not talking about missiles and rockets and any other goodies that NATO may have actually supplied to Kiev. These distances are vastly greater. So this whole 10-kilometer thing is some sort of wishful thinking, maybe on the side of Kiev, or it doesn't make sense. The situation in Kharkov is going to be a bit different, because if you remember at the beginning of the war, Russia sort of rushed into the 4 new states, Novorossiya, and very quickly they had referendums. Well, Kharkov was abandoned for the most part, partially, for a while ago. You'll see news of a sad Ukrainian police officer saying about how they need to abandon Kharkov, but it was already partially evacuated, abandoned, or whatever term you want to use, a while ago. I guess now it's going to be even closer to complete. So, when and if Russia actually does take this entire region, this entire basically state of Ukraine, it's going to be really hard to have any sort of referendum, because there's kind of just nobody left. You know what I mean? It's going to be just the people who are too poor or desperate or scared to flee, and you can't really have a very good-looking, attractive international referendum when 10% of the population's left, 5%, however many. You kind of have to have at least 50, 60% of the people from the start of the war. So in some ways, maybe that's one of the other reasons why Putin said that they wanted to have it as a demilitarized zone, because he knows that although if a referendum was enacted, I think we all know which side would win that referendum heavy-handedly. But the question is, if only like 10% of the people are left to, vote on it, well, then that's not going to be very, let's say, appealing internationally. You know what I mean? So the status of Kharkov is going to be something to look forward to. That's one of those issues where on our channel, look forward to this in the future. Stay tuned, because I'll be keeping an eye on that, because the Russian government's going to have to resolve that issue, because there is no region of Russia that I can think of currently or in Russia's history that was just sort of declared like a dead zone. You know what I mean? Like how between The northern part of Cyprus and the southern part of Cyprus, there's a demilitarized just dead zone, and you should look it up on Google. It's kind of interesting. There's still like pictures of all the places that were kind of between the two walls that have been somewhat abandoned. It's kind of it's Stalker, but Greek Stalker. And there's the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. And I really do not think that the Russian government is planning to turn the entire region of Kharkov into one big like DMZ. I think that that is also nuts. So eventually they're going to have to find some sort of mechanism to get enough people to go back there, or perhaps recalculate the population or do something in order to make an effective referendum. Because again, I really, guys, I'd be willing to bet a pretty substantial amount of money that Russia's not going to stop at 10 kilometers. I think that's some kind of weird nuts thinking from the internet. But anyways, what have we seen? We've seen that the Russian forces were able to move fairly quickly, despite the fact that, 10 years ago, what was his name? Yatsenyuk, I think, tried to build some kind of like border fence with Russia or something. Yeah, that's those border defenses didn't matter. They just went right through. And it does seem that there's much less resistance because the ultimate aim, I think, of this really, and this isn't the original idea. So, besides talking about the referendum, that's original. That you heard here first on Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore. That's original thinking because no one else has been talking about the status of this region and what that's going to happen there. So that's original. What is not original is that probably what they're trying to do on the Russian side, which I mentioned in a video before this happened, that was released a few days ago. You should check it out because I guess I was right on that one. That they're just trying to sort of spread the Ukrainian line even thinner. Because if the whole front was what some people say 600 miles, it's hard to say. It changes every day, but let's just say 600 miles. Well, probably another 150 or 200 miles has been added to the front lines, which just sort of thins Kiev's forces even thinner and thinner and thinner, as Russia's finally moving the guys that they trained up, all those volunteers that they got back way near the start of the war during that sort of first mobilization, are now moving into positions and doing what they're doing and moving pretty quick. So again, this is this whole thing of spreading Kiev, which is already thin, and spreading it even thinner. As I mentioned in that previous video that I just mentioned, I talked about how, after Avdiivka, they don't have a whole lot of defensive fortifications, right? And you could see that in the Kharkov region, they really don't. Even if they did see this coming, they weren't able to prepare for it. And for the most part, at best, they're using like civilian excavators and bulldozers to try to haphazardly put together simple trench networks, they being the Kiev's forces, further and further back away from the front line as the Russians continuously advance. And we've even seen videos, plenty of videos on VK and OK here in Russia of unfortunately, the drones hitting all of these trench digging machinery. I say unfortunately because obviously the people who are operating it are just civilians who are being forced to do it. And these semi-truck drivers and bulldozer operators and excavator operators, they're getting blown to bits as if they were a, uniformed up soldier. But that's another thing about war being hell, and why today we have got to be, let's just say, I'm happy that this offensive is finally coming because it will make the war end quicker. The quicker this gets over with, the better. So that was another point I wanted to talk about. The other thing about Kharkov, which I think is another thing that I'd be happy to bet some money on, is I am almost sure that within a short amount of time, maybe a month or something, who knows, the speed of this, like we saw Mariupol, that took forever. Then Bakhmut took a decently long time. Avdiivka fell really quick. So kind of the speed of the graph, the graph is kind of going up, 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 up for speed. So who knows how long this will take, but maybe not super long. When Kharkov falls, how's it going to fall? They're going to surround it on three sides. They're going to then create a corridor from which the Ukraine can actually reinforce its guys in Kharkov. So they'll leave one side open, and then they'll just shoot them from all three sides, We've seen this in Mariupol. We especially saw this in Bakhmut and in Avdiivka. And they fall for it every time. So what we're going to see is the classic cauldron technique of the Russians is going to be used again. They're not going to, no matter what our lovely EU politicians tell us in their amazing speeches, the Russians are not going to fight for Kharkov in some sort of like Stalingrad style, going street to street, house to house. They're going to surround it on three sides, and they're just going to pound the hell out of everything. And they're going to pound and pound and pound until the enemy runs out of food and runs out of ammunition and starts to flee. And then when they flee, they go through the sort of uncovered side, and that side creates a sort of corridor of death where the Russians continue to pound them as they run away, which has already happened numerous times during this war. And I just noted three major notable times where they kind of did that. Of course, with Azovstal and Mariupol, the water got in the way, so it wasn't quite like Bakhmut or Avdiivka, but overall the concept remains the same. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And Kiev is going to probably fall for it again because for some reason they absolutely refuse to, on a grand scale, modify their tactics. Obviously, the Kiev's forces have done some adjustments in their tactics. They're not exactly fighting the way the war today as they were day one, and not just because they've lost a lot of guys. There is some adaptation, but for some reason, on like a grand strategic plan level, they just can't deal with this. They can't understand that they're going to get surrounded on three sides and then blasted as they try to escape. So who knows? But so anyways, guys, the formation of this northern group, this somewhat major offensive is definitely cause for a live stream, and it is definitely cause for hope. That hopefully, and here's that hope, that hopefully this will all be freaking over soon. What's going to be after the war, that's maybe a topic for another day. I think it kind of a little bit depends on how the elections go in the United States. I say a little bit because not entirely, a little bit. Maybe the flavor is going to be adjusted by who wins. But essentially that's a whole other topic. So anyways, the most important thing here is, because we've been covering the war for since the entire start of the war here at Tim Kirby Russia, this is one of those truly major developments. One thing, guys, that I don't like is when people try to make everything seem important. Like you'll see those channels on YouTube where they'll show the map of the battle zone and they'll be like, the Russians are advancing, they're in complete domination, and it's like 3 villages fell. It's like, that's not real news. This is real news. This is a real major thing, that there's now a completely different new front. This front is extremely wide. It is very far away from the other fronts. And its proximity to Kiev, although, walking from the edge of Kharkov to Kiev is not exactly a short walk. But you can see that they're going to be moving probably after Kharkov. They're going to start moving probably that direction, or who knows? We don't really know, and that's good because unlike Zelensky's men who laid out their counteroffensive, as they called it, and they just laid it out, released it to the media, and then did exactly what they said. So unlike that, the Russians are going to keep the cards a little bit close to their chests, but we can see that the priority here seems to not be Odessa, and it seems to be the north. Because remember, Odessa is key. It is, I've mentioned it before, but maybe some people here are new. Hopefully some people are enjoying this recorded live stream, or live stream as it's going. But remember, the next powder keg is Moldova, and Russia has to make some sort of, if not big, but even tiny or decent physical connection to the territory of Moldova. Or I think a lot of this stuff is just going to repeat, because Maya Sandu, the president of Moldova, who, to be honest, I think has got that presidency in a little bit of a dubious way. She is no different than Zelensky in terms of her submission to the West. She is not some sort of national leader who just happens to be salty at Russia. A good example of a national leader who actually spent his entire youth fighting Russia would be Orban, because he was not happy with the way communism was, and I understand why. But Sandu is more just like a typical EU bureaucrat, and she is probably willing to throw her population into the meat grinder just as much as Zelensky is. So, well, that's the one thing is I think if Russia does end the war and there is no physical contact between Russia's territory and Moldova, uh, I wouldn't say the war was lost, but I would say in that instance there is going to be more problems in 5 to 10 years, uh, for sure. Again, unless something freakish happens and in Washington some sort of new, completely different mentality comes about, then Moldova doesn't matter. But yeah, so let's see. Before we get to questions, let me have a little drink here. Forgive me. Good, good old Azerbaijani juice. And just in again to sort of recap, this is actually a major development. The front line is now way wider than it was. It was already really ridiculously wide. Kiev's forces don't have a ton of defenses around Kharkov. They've fallen for the strategy of the cauldron of being surrounded on three sides so many times before. They're going to fall for it again. And this is going to stretch Kiev's forces even thinner and even closer to the breaking point. And that's why it's a major development and worth talking about it on a live stream. So anyways, I'm probably going to knock over my phone 50 times here, but let's see if anyone had some questions or wants to call in. Okay, let's see. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. Hold on. Where's my stuff? Someone asked me about something. Tim, you look like you are sitting on the bathroom floor. No, sir, this is not a bathroom. This is a living room. It just has lovely white painted walls. Behind me is not a toilet. It is a sofa. So, anyways, we do not have a lot of questions here so far. Okay, and that's fine. We don't have to have questions. Does anyone want to talk today? There's a bunch of people listening. Look at all the people listening. Wow, that's great. But no one wants to talk. Or oh wait, so someone does. Sam does. Sam usually wants to talk. Sam, try talking. Hopefully, I can hear you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yes.
Okay. How you been?
Oh, pretty good. I've been on vacation, so for me personally, things are good. And again, from the standpoint of getting this war over with and the amount of people dying stopping, this is a very good thing.
All right, all right. I've been reading a book on. There's a author, Edvard Brzezinski, and he wrote "The Last Tsar, the Last Great Tsar." Anyway, I'm just reading. Like in 1905, Tsar Nicholas II was under a lot of pressure, and the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, whatever, was found in 1905 by a Russian guy. And I'm wondering, is that one of the impetuses for the hatred of Russia by the neocons and like the Victoria Nulands and her husband, the Kagan guy?
Okay. So we have a thing of like, why do the neocons hate Russia? The thing you're mentioning about like something of Zion or whatever, that I can't really comment on, but I can tell you that a lot of influential people, including some people related to like Zionism, like what's his name, Libovitz or whatever, some really famous rabbi who was extremely influential, was from Ukraine, but that was the Russian Empire. And in fact, like Zelensky was unable to like guarantee that pilgrims could go there. He was influential. In terms of like occultism, you have Yelena Blavatsky. It was super. It still is many 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 generations after her death. In the world of the occult with her Theosophical Society, and a lot of people can make connections to that between all sorts of occult stuff. But that's a question you'd have to ask for the master of weird occult knowledge, Matt Arrett. We've had the program. He could
Okay.
probably tell you more about that. But yeah, there are some notable people from Imperial Russia that you might not know much about, but that have had an influence on the way that the Western elite thinks, especially Blavatsky. So like the whole New Age thing that happened in like the 60s and all that, very connected to Blavatsky and her way of looking at things and her sort of demonic, satanic interpretation of things. So a lot of that, like Hollywood religion of whatever they believe in, of their post-Christian demons and monsters in the New Age, that all goes back to her to some extent. The problem, because probably actually two of the most maybe influential women in history were both from the Russian Empire. That is Blavatsky and who we call Ayn Rand, right? Because she was also extremely influential on the way that the elite in the West thinks. Many people in the elite who we like more than the rest of the elite quote Ayn Rand all the time. She was extremely influential. But is that a reason to hate Russia? I don't know. But I can say that Ayn Rand really was someone who was super influential, and her opinion on Russia was not very good. As was Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn was also somewhat, I would say, influential, but he is not in a sort of mystical, spiritual, occult context. And he was in a different context, but he also really formulated the way that the elite in the West looks at Russia. I think he's also a very key figure, but again, not in an occult sense that I know of. So, yeah.
Interesting. I have a second question. Do you think that, in hindsight, the current leadership in Russia sees that the Soviet Bolshevik Revolution and the progression that led to, Stalin, I might be missing one guy, Khrushchev and Gorbachev, everything that happened, that was a necessary process in evolving a more perfect governance system? Do you think they look at it that way, or do they look at Soviet Bolshevism as a major mistake that led to no good?
Well, I can tell you one thing is I read a post by Dugin, right, our favorite philosopher here on the channel, and he said that when he was a young man, he used to spit on every Lenin statue he saw because Lenin, destroyed religion. He said he destroyed Russia, but then later he saw that Lenin actually sort of created somewhat of a time capsule that sort of locked Russia away from the ills of modernism, only to be released at the right time. So. That's kind of an interesting opinion. Brutal time capsule to be in. But you know what? I'm not sure. I do know one thing, that when the elite thinks about, let's say specifically Lenin, is that kind of the hillbillies in Russia are always going to be basically the whole thing of, but in the Soviet Union, education was free. Of course, it wasn't, because you had to work a 40-hour week or you got thrown in jail. But they say, in the Soviet Union, I got an apartment for free. And I didn't share this because I didn't quite know how to format it. But if you look, about 50% of adult Russians are in favor of socialism. Socialism in their sense, which is like the sort of whatever the Soviet system was, okay? So the Russian elite, and I think Putin understands that certain things about the Soviet Union were extremely appealing to people, and they still are. And they could either fight that, or they could do the thing like Putin said of just uniting all Russian history into one big thing, one big stream. It's all one thing, and just saying it's all good, more or less, because we're a good people, and let's just roll with it, baby. So I think what you said about this thing of like, well, see, you got into sort of whether something was historically necessary or not. I don't think that for most of the people right now, that's super particularly important of a question. The main question, especially when I came to Russia, was, are we gonna have a white Russia or a red Russia? And then Putin was like, no, we're having both at the same time. And a new Russia, which we could call blue Russia, as the sort of, symbol of the new liberalism that's here, right? and sort of have it all be one and F it. I mean, there might be contradictions, but who cares? And so I think that that's ultimately what they've sort of decided on. So your question isn't super important because it really sort of supposes that they would have to pick sort of one side of history or the other. And I think they're just going to go with nah, we're gonna pick both sides of history, pal.
Yeah, and I think it's proving to be, with the mixed economy that Russia has and that China has, that it's actually better, because my complaint always of the United States was that we don't protect any of our local industries. It's great to
Mm-hmm.
have cheap labor abroad, but something can happen to the supply chain, and then you just don't have it, and we're facing those types of scenarios today. So yeah, I do
Oh
see.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say that, during the Soviet Union, people were really committed to this whole communism thing. Like that was a real thing. But when communism fell, it isn't as if everyone just switched a light switch and became extremely committed to sort of like free market capitalism. Like you're kind of mentioning with like the Chinese, it kind of became a blend. And I think that that's what works. Like our guest that we've had on many times, Andrei Afanasyev, the famous war correspondent and TV show host and reporter, we've had on a bunch of times. He even mentioned that one of the problems in the past was we tried to build men for an economic system where we need to have an economic system that serves us as men. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what he was saying, that like now in Russia, where this isn't like, when you listen to YouTube from Western people, it's like someone is a Keynesian kind of person, or they're a big fan of like a sort of like Adam Smith thing, or going back to Ayn Rand. Like you get into this sort of school of economics and you believe in it. And in Russia, it's more like drawing from all the different schools, given the proper context and seeing what works or what doesn't. And I think the people in power, especially Mishustin, well, Glaziev is kind of not really in power. He is, but he isn't. Glaziev, the other famous economists like Khazin that I mention here a lot, Katasonov, all those guys, like they get it. They get it that, you know what, when it comes to like making cool custom designed T-shirts, capitalism. You know, when it comes to having a like coffee shop somewhere, pure capitalism. When it comes to military production, as we're seeing in the West, that doesn't seem to work. You know, and certain major key industries that are, huge factories with thousands of workers that need to just stably produce the same pipes that they've been making on the same machines since 1950. Those can be sort of run and influenced by the government, but even state companies have to make a profit now. They can't fail. Nothing is too big to fail in Russia, except for maybe Sparebank. So you see, I think that this approach from various philosophies is a much stronger position. It's kind of like using the proper tool for the proper mission, rather than trying to force everything to fit this like Soviet socialist box or Western style American capitalism box. So
Yeah,
I think that that's one of the strengths of both China and Russia. China's, I
right.
think, a lot less ideological on some fronts than people think.
Yeah, and I think the West, like you said, is the one that's suffering more about from rather suffering from forcing everything through the capitalist, profit-driven model. Because
Yeah, because dude,
you know,
some things aren't profit driven, or no, shouldn't be. Some things should, and some shouldn't. Like I think one thing is too is we all know, for who are American, that this whole thing of making medical care profit driven, but also taking huge amounts of money from the government at the same time, even though it's profit driven, has created the nightmare. Same thing with the military industrial complex, which is really letting down the U.S. military right now. That attitude of the government dumps money into private corporations that just do whatever the hell they want. Maybe there are certain applications for that, but it's biting us in the butt on those fronts. That's for sure.
right.
So,
And have you heard about Janet Yellen announcing that anyone that is going to draw their 401k in the future needs to have 10% of Treasury bonds?
no, I didn't know that. That is interesting. Well, they got to make someone buy bonds somehow. So I guess that's one way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
well, if that's true, see, the thing is, again, I don't like to be hyperbolic, but maybe I should. I'd probably have a lot more subscribers if I was really hyperbolic. And Sam, I was like, oh my God, that's going to change everything. It is going to alter the way America works forever. I'd probably get way more subscribers. But I'll tell you the truth is it is going to require probably a lot more than that to compensate for the fact that now, like Americans, the American like government bond market or whatever is basically viewed as being toxic by like the Japanese and Chinese, who I think were some of the main contributors to it. And obviously the Russians can't buy it, even if they wanted to, which they don't. So yeah, they're going to make someone foot the bill. But I don't think, like looking at my generation and the younger generation, I don't think there are that many big, juicy 401k havers. I mean, there's a few million people, but a few million normies is nothing compared to the purchasing power of the Japanese or especially the Chinese government. Come on. Did she say how many bonds? Like, how much are we talking here? 10% of
I
the value of their 401k or something?
Yeah, I think it was 10% of the value of the 401k, and it has to be a 2%. I forget, but and she's bypassing the whole legislative process. She said the Treasury, in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, is deciding to do this. So it's really a precedent-setting.
Well, that's something where if you get time, why don't you send me some links about that so I can read it? But again, it's what you're saying is a little surprising, but like I said, it kind of makes sense because if no one is going to buy bonds, and which could cause America to sort of somewhat kind of collapse. I don't think it would be a full collapse, but I'm not a legendary economist. But it will be bad for America. And if we can force the American average person to again foot the bill for everything, well, that's one solution. So sounds like a fitting solution, a real a Fed a solution to a big problem that they created.
Yeah, no
So,
kidding.
yeah. Anyways, man, if you got something else for me, I'd love to keep going, but maybe someone else wants to talk, or do they not? Well, there's a lot of people listening. That's good, but no one wants to talk. Sam, do you have maybe like one last question or something then, and then I'll let you go. And if someone else wants to talk, remember you can use the raise your hand function. There's a button to do it somewhere on your phone or computer. I don't really participate in many shows, so I forgot where it was. Every time I go to the
No,
Fiend show, I have to
I'm
remember.
I'm pretty much out of questions, but thanks for your time and
Oh, all right.
appreciate
Yeah,
the show.
no, good stuff, man. Good stuff, especially about the Federal Reserve. That is extremely interesting. So here we have the chat. Let's see. Sounds very healthy and very flexible. I wonder what Lydia is referring to. About maybe about what we were talking about with the economy. So yeah, Lydia, I agree. That's definitely the strength of Russia. And one of the other things that's surprising, hold on, isn't the West dogmatic and indoctrinated? Uh, Lydia, you actually bring up a very good point. Is the West dogmatic and indoctrinated? Uh, kind of, yeah. Um, because as we've seen again with this whole thing from the maybe hmm, let's just say if we don't use the word dogmatic, but we use stuck in their ways, then yeah, because one of the reasons that Russia has been able to survive, if not thrive, throughout all this pressure from Washington is because Washington and the whole the blob, the swamp, the deep state, and all these other whatever the mass of people who do things on behalf of America that aren't really mentioned much in the Constitution, if at all. All of those people who have been fighting against Russia, they've really been fighting against like they've been shadowboxing. They've been shadowboxing against the shadow of the Soviet Union. They were because when they caused some gas price crises, it really hurt the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union, although it did have a lot of industry, communist industry not super effective. And I'll put it this way: the whole like gas station masquerading as a global superpower, that might be a little bit more fitting the Soviet Union than modern day Russia. But they basically all of their plans about the sanctions and how the war in Ukraine would go and all this was all really based on looking at what Russia was like in the 1980s. And they're just absolutely were stuck with that vision, and they're still sort of stuck with it. When it gets to being dogmatic, I think that a lot of these people are more dogmatic about these ideas that, like, the world is overpopulated, human beings are an awful blight on the world. The idea of like this super postmodern liberalism that even the idea of having like groups like men and women is evil and repressive because if you're part of a group of men, that means something, and that meaning is forced onto you by other people. Like there are dogmatic elements to these elite nutcases, but I don't think they quite super apply to Russia. Well, other than the fact that Russia violates all their dogmatic beliefs, you know, uh, that I can think of. So, yeah, I don't think it's a dogmatic issue. It's more of a being stuck in 1980 because, like I mentioned, and it bears repeating, if they were to have done to like 1980s weak Soviet Union Russia basically did the same things to them that they did to today's Russia, all that would have worked because like the gas price thing did work. They weren't able to create a war within the Soviet Union, but they certainly were able to collapse it from the inside. So collapsing Russia from the inside worked in the from the late 80s to 1991. So yeah, I guess it's kind of a case of expecting something to work forever, even if it doesn't, even if the situations kind of change and all that stuff. So very good questions, guys. Amazing. Even the last live stream, the questions were amazing. I did get angry at one person. I apologize. I think I'm getting a little ornery in my old age here, but really good questions. Amazing. Anyone want to talk? Or no? No. Looks like the audience is a little bit more Russian today than usual. Okay, any other comments here on the chat? Also, no. That's interesting. Well, guys, if no one wants to chat, then let me just say some final words and get out of here. Oh boy, this is a real bad day. You know, last time I did a live stream, this whole setup worked fantastic. Now it's sucking. Uh, anyways, again, we are finally starting to see what should be the getting close to the final phase of the war. I know on a map, you kind of see that there's still a lot of territory within Ukraine till the Russians get to the Dnieper River. That is far away. I understand that. But the thing is with war and all that, once the enemy army really breaks, then you're pretty much free to move. If you look at, especially in like China, if you look at what used to be, uh, maybe we still call it Manchuria. I don't know. Got something in my sock here. Oh no, that's a big bird. Wow. How did I get that in the house? Um, anyways, if you look at a map of what used to be Manchuria, right? Or I think I forget if they call it something else now. But anyways, that's a big area. Okay, that's a very, very vast area of land. Like I think it might be the size of a few U.S. states put together. And at the end of the war, World War II, the very final months, Japan was took a beating from the United States was get, eventually would get hit by the atomic bombs, but their supply lines were cut. They ran out of ammo, ran out of fuel, and so the Russians had to fight the Germans on well, for us in English it's the Eastern Front, but for the Russians it would be a Western Front. But they still were in contesting the Japanese to kind of a stalemate. And as soon as Germany leaves the war, that's when I forget what the speed was, but I think the Russians took something like all of Manchuria within like 3 weeks. It's some sort of crazy amount of territory. So it was stalemate, stalemate, stalemate for years, focusing all on the war against the Germans, and then a complete collapse, and I swept all the way through it over this titanic amount of territory within a very, very short amount of time. So, long story short, we could very much see a repeat of Manchuria happening again as We've already I've seen many videos of many captured, seemingly unwilling men my age on the Ukrainian side from the Kharkov region. So, the soldiers there don't really want to fight, a lot of them, and they're surrendering and they're running out of ammo. Anyways, we've heard all sorts of reports that the Ukrainians have one artillery shell for every 10 the Russians have. And eventually, that distance to the Dnieper River can be closed pretty quickly once the enemy army breaks. So hopefully, what we're seeing is the end of the war. So, anyways, if no one wants to talk, I'll check for questions, and if there are no questions, there are none. So, anyways, guys, I guess this was a kind of a shorter live stream today. But anyways, Tim Kirby Russia signing out. Thanks for being with me, guys, and hopefully we'll all have peace soon, very soon.